I have a problem, and the problem is that I'm selfish with my garden. I worked so hard on this thing, and this is mine. I just want to grow whatever I want to grow. But I'm also a good husband, and I want to grow what my wife wants to grow as well. But normally what she wants to grow isn't what I want to grow. So instead of letting her take over half of this garden, I decided it was probably the best idea to just give her her own garden. So that's what I did. Today I'm gonna go through everything we did to build my wife her garden. We're gonna go through how we built the beds and how we filled them and how we placed them and all the work that went into building that garden. Now before we get started, there is gonna be a giveaway in this video. If you've ever seen my raised beds, all these beds here behind me, I've got 16 back here, and now we have another 2 up front. These are all VEGO garden beds, and VEGO Garden is kindly letting me give away one of these beds, one of these exact beds that I have either back here or up front. So stick around in this video. We're gonna talk about the rules to this giveaway later, but that's coming, so stick around for that. So to get started, we had this area in our front yard that we didn't really use for anything. We had this old raised bed there that we've got some asparagus plants in, and they've been doing pretty well in there. They're on their, this is gonna be their 2nd year. Last year they grew so well, and honestly I wanted to just harvest them last year, but with asparagus you can't really do that. We've got that bed up there. We had a couple of these little metal raptors. We had a peach tree. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to put a peach tree right there, but we had a peach tree there. And then we had this giant hibiscus plant that just takes over that whole area, and I hate this plant, but my wife loves it. So I wanted to take this space and turn it into a garden for my wife so she can start growing what she wants to grow. The first thing we did is we started getting the raised beds assembled, and honestly it was my wife that did the assembling of the raised beds. She was just excited about her fancy shiny new raised beds, and while she was doing that, I went over to that little garden area that we're going to be using, and I started cleaning it up. I started raking up all the leaves and picking up all the sticks and doing all the things that needed to be done in order to put everything where it needs to be. One of the big things I had to do was bring in some soil. We had some old topsoil that we used for this garden specifically that I'm sitting in. We had some old topsoil. It honestly isn't very good at this point. It's just been sitting there. So I took some of that to kind of level out some of the areas where we're going to be working up front and where we're placing these raised beds, because we don't want them sitting at an angle. So I brought in a few wheelbarrows of soil and cleaned the area up a little bit. This sun is going to be coming in and out, and honestly it's kind of difficult to keep this from making me look like just a ghost or something. I apologize. I don't have a plan for this video. I know that I have hours of B-roll for this video, but I'm just gonna kind of sit here, drink my coffee, and tell you about how we built this garden. What kind of laser beam sun is going on right now? This hibiscus plant that my wife is just so in love with, it grows so fast. We'll cut it pretty far down, like a couple feet from the ground every year. And every year it grows like 10 feet tall, and it just takes over everything back there. It turns into this huge bush. It flowers for like a week or 2 out of the year. And yeah, it's pretty when it flowers, but I'm not the biggest fan of this thing, but my wife loves it. Instead of letting this thing grow wild like we normally do, we were going to cut it all the way down, like as low as we could cut it. And this thing is pretty well established. It was here way before we bought the place. We're cutting it all the way down to the bottom, pretty much to the ground, as low as we can possibly get it. And we're gonna contain this plant a little bit this year, keep it trimmed up and not just let it do whatever it wants. We've never cut it this low before, so honestly, I don't even know if it's gonna make it from this trimming, if you wanna call it that. But my wife fully understands that. We are chopping this thing down because we don't want this plant shading any of the stuff we're trying to grow in this garden this year. So we're lucky enough to have our best friends across the street, and we've also met some really good friends that live 2 houses down. We had one of them come over and help my wife, and honestly I think it was just therapeutic for them. They sat there and chopped away at this hibiscus bush and had a whole lot of fun with it. I'm pretty sure they had some good therapy chopping away at this thing, but we got it chopped all the way down to the ground, and that's what mattered. We needed it out of the way. If it was up to me, we would have ripped it out of the ground, but I'll take what I can get. And then we had our peach tree up there, and the peach tree had to go because it was just in the way. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to plant it there. We had to move the peach tree. I'm not going to go too much into that because we did a whole separate video about the peach tree and digging it up and replanting it elsewhere. So I will put a link for that video down in the description below if you want to look into what we did with that peach tree. If you've seen that video and you're curious about how the peach tree is doing, it's starting to bud right now. So I'm pretty sure it made it through the transplant, but I'll know more here in the next few weeks. Day 2 is where things really started to get moving. I started out day 2 by just cleaning up the area more. We had some branches from that hibiscus, and we just had more junk in that area from all the work we've been doing, and I had to get rid of it. So I started cleaning that up and raking everything up and clearing out the space, because today is the day that we are moving the raised beds into the garden. And while I was doing this, my wife started gathering things up to put in the bottom of the raised bed. And one of the things that she does every year, and this is something that I think it's fun, and I feel like it is a very low energy way of growing a sunflower garden. So she's got this little, let's call it a garden bed area up front that the first year we lived here, she went in and she just tossed sunflower seeds down in the bed, just all different kinds, whatever kind she wanted to grow. And they all grew, and we had this crazy sunflower garden. So every year in the fall, when the sunflowers start to die back, she doesn't pull them out of the garden. She waits until the spring. So these sunflowers completely die off. And then when she pulls them out of that little garden area, she shakes all the sunflower seeds back down into the soil and then just amends it with compost and things like that. And what this does is she never has to like go get seeds. She just lets them dry off on the flower, shakes them all off into the garden bed area, and then they just all sprout back in the spring. I will say this does get kind of out of control sometimes. Last year we had sunflowers growing like in the grass out around it because she's not very careful when she removes these sunflower seeds, so they just fall in the grass and all over the place. But it does make for a really dense and big and beautiful sunflower garden, and it attracts a lot of pollinators, which is good as well. And that sunflower garden from where I'm sitting is like, I would say 50 feet that way, and so it does bring a lot of the bees and different things to my garden, which is great. So I had her get all these old dead sunflowers, and I wanted to put them in the very bottom of these raised beds, so that way any leftover sunflower seeds didn't start sprouting up, but it is going to take some space up in the bottom of those beds, which is exactly what I wanted. The next things we had that we could put in the bottom of these beds, we had some tomato plants and some pepper plants that are 2 years old. They've been sitting in our little pile of, I'm going to call it compost, but let's be honest, it's not compost. It's been sitting in this pile for the last 2 years. These are plants that came out of this garden 2 years ago, and they've just been sitting there. They're dry, nasty, just not doing anything. So we put those in the bottom of these raised beds as well, just to take up some more space. After that, I took some chicken bedding that's been sitting over in that pile for about the last year or so, and I put that and just kind of like put it down in between all the branches and sunflowers and plants and everything down there in the bottom. So that way the first, I would say maybe 20% of that raised bed was filled with just these things that are just taking up space. That's all we needed it to do. Now, once I had all those things in the bottom of the beds, we had to start putting in some soil, something for the plants to actually grow in. And we took that same topsoil that I told you about earlier, the stuff that's been sitting there for over a year now. We took that same topsoil and mixed it with compost, and we did roughly 50-50 mixture. If anything, we did a little bit more topsoil than we did compost. What I did is I filled my wagon full of topsoil and I filled my wheelbarrow full of compost, and then wheeled them over to my raised beds, and then I just kind of layered it all in there. I would take a few shovelfuls of soil, a few shovelfuls of compost, and just kind of staggered everything in. In the past, I've hand mixed a lot of my soil, but I didn't have the time to do that this time, so I just layered it all in there. All the activity in there and the little bugs and worms and stuff. Eventually, this compost and this soil is just going to be one thing. It's not going to be two separate things that I put in there. The last thing we did on day 2 was we weeded out the asparagus bed. A lot of weeds were starting to grow in there. We needed to make sure it's clean and ready for the asparagus to pop back up here shortly. Now, before we get on to day 3, let's talk about this VEGO garden giveaway. Now, I'm going to be giving away a 17-inch 10-in-1 raised bed, and that's going to be the exact same raised bed that I'm sitting in right now, as well as the raised beds that I'm building out in front throughout this entire video. These are my favorite raised beds I've ever had. This was a game changer for my garden last year. I have never had a garden grow like it did last year. It was just exploding with growth. And a lot of times the first year you have a raised bed, it's kind of difficult to kind of get things going. But with this, I had no issue. It might have been the soil, it might have been something else. But either way, all I know is I had the best gardening season of my entire life last year with these VEGO garden beds. Now, with these 10-in-1 raised beds, these are 17 inches tall, and when I say 10-in-1, what that means is these can configure into 10 different configurations. I have the 4 foot by 8 foot configuration that I'm sitting in now, and now all my beds are back here. And I did that configuration specifically just for the layout that I wanted. I wanted my arched trellises in between them. You might be able to see these here behind me, but up front, it worked better for us to do I think it's the 9.5 by 2.5 foot configuration, more of the long and skinny configuration. It just depends on what you need, and these beds let you do that. Now, VEGO Garden has kindly agreed to let me give one of these beds away. It doesn't necessarily have to be the color that I'm sitting in now, these gray ones, and it doesn't even have to be the pearl white ones that I have up front. They have some other color options as well. You can go down into the link in the description below and go to their website, and that's going to show you all the different colors that they have for these raised beds. Now, the rules for this giveaway are going to be really simple. I need 2 things from you. I need you to like this video, and that's just going to help spread this video to more people, and then I want you to comment on this video and just tell me what you would be growing in this raised bed if you win it. I love hearing hearing about other people's gardens, what they're growing, what they want to grow, and really I love to hear what people are growing in these VEGO beds. So that's all I need from you. I need you to like this video and then go down in the comments and let me know what you're gonna grow in it if you win. I'm gonna let this video go for 1 week. Today is Sunday. On the following Sunday, I'm gonna announce the winner. I will probably do that in the form of just a really quick video. I might be doing it in a form of a community post. Either way, I will make sure that I get in contact with the person that wins these beds. Once you win the bed, I'm gonna get you in contact with VEGO Garden. You can pick out your color and they will send it directly to you. This is something that I'm definitely extremely excited about, and I'm really excited to hear about what you would grow in this if you win. So go down into the comments, let me know what you'd be growing, go like this video, and then I'll let you know who wins next week. Now we're into day 3, and day 3 starts out with a tower garden. And if I'm being honest, my wife's leafy greens, like her kale and lettuce and all these different things, they took up 2 or 3 of my garden beds last year. Me being the smart person I am, decided let's make sure my wife has some tower gardens out front so that way she can grow all of her lettuces vertically, and this way she can grow all of her lettuce in a much smaller space, and she can do it in her garden. So we made sure that she got set up with some tower gardens. The first one is one that we've used in the past. It is 5 tiers tall, so you can fit plenty of plants in there. Now the first thing I had to do with these is I had to start cleaning them because they've been sitting in my garage for like 2 years. They're covered in spider webs and just nasty looking, and I had to get them clean. So I sprayed them all out, and then while those were drying, I went back over to my asparagus bed and I started laying in some compost because I needed to revitalize the soil, give it some nutrition, because last year as everything was growing, you deplete that nutrition. I wanted to put that back in the form of something that wasn't just like a bunch of fertilizers. So I put in about 2 inches of compost on the top of my asparagus bed, and hopefully that's going to help feed and kind of wake up and get my asparagus ready to go for the season. And then we also have this just big tub out front that we've been growing horseradish in for like 2 years now. And horseradish is one of those things that you plant it and you don't really get good harvest for a couple of years. It takes a while. So we planted our horseradish out there, and we've been letting it grow in this pot for a couple of years, and it's starting to get pretty crazy. Last year it was a very big plant. I could have harvested it last year, but I didn't. Probably should have, but I didn't. And this is one that just overwinters just fine. We live here in Utah. I think technically we're a zone 7A now, something like that. It changed recently. We have pretty cold winters. I mean, it's March right now and my whole garden's full of snow from this morning. Horseradish is something that you can grow. You want to be careful though with horseradish because it likes to just kind of take things over. So we just grew ours in a tub because we didn't need a lot of it. It was just one of those things that I wanted to grow. And it's starting to come back now, so I wanted to give that some nutrition as well. And I threw some compost into that pot to kind of get that jump started and going. After the tower garden was completely dried out, I started mixing some soil together, and I did the same kind of mixture that I did for the raised beds. I did about 50-50 topsoil and compost. And if I need to mix in any organic fertilizers later, I can do that. But for now, I think this is going to be plenty for it. I got the soil mixed up, and then I started filling this tower garden. And I'll be honest, it took quite a bit more soil than I thought it would. I had to go back like almost twice to get more soil because it was a lot. And when I lined it up against my raised beds to start getting it ready to stack up on top of each other, I was definitely looking at it like, holy cow, this is like a good fraction of the size of this raised bed. So you can grow quite a bit in a tower garden in general. They take a lot of soil and it gives you a lot of growing medium in a very small space. It's like a 2 square foot space. So I went ahead and got my tower garden stacked up and ready to be planted in. Well, my wife's tower garden, it's not mine. And then I realized that I never added the outer edging, the little trim piece that goes on top of the raised beds that stops you from getting cut. It's a nice little trim piece that goes on the outside of this bed. I went ahead and put this trim piece on the top of the raised beds, and when you're putting these on, I learned something when I did these beds. Well, actually it took me months to kind of figure it out, but I figured something out with my old raised beds that are helping with the front ones. When you go to put this trim on your raised bed, do yourself a favor, and when you go to cut it, I want you to kind of push back, kind of retract some of that stuff and squeeze in as much material, as much of that as you can in there. Because what's going to happen is if you just lay it all out and then cut it right where it's supposed to be, over time that can kind of pull back and you're going to have a gap in your upper edge. I have that in a couple of my beds that I didn't kind of push back. I hope that makes sense, but you would definitely want to do that so that way you don't have it pull away and leave a gap there. After that, I went around and I watered everything in. So what I like to do when I put fresh soil in a fresh bed and it's all kind of fluffy and sitting in there, and you don't want to smash it all down because you don't want it to be like a compacted soil, but you do want to see if it's going to settle. So what I do is I water everything in really well. I give it a heavy soaking, water all that in, and see if it settles at all. If it does settle, you can add some more soil on the top there. But I watered everything in, everything that I had just done. So my raised beds and the barrel and the horseradish and the asparagus, everything that I added any new soil or compost to, I watered it in really well. And then I decided that we're gonna plant carrots in my wife's little wine barrel. And yes, I talked to her first. I'm not a crazy person. I'm not just gonna go plant carrots in her wine barrel. So I talked to her first. She was on board. She thinks the little fluffy leaves coming out the top are cute. So she wanted some carrots and she loves her carrots. I started getting ready to plant these seeds. And what I did is the wine barrel was already wet from me just watering it down just a minute ago. And after that, I mixed all my carrot seeds together. We did 3 different types of carrots that we're gonna do in this wine barrel here. And then I sprinkled them all over the top of this soil here in this wine barrel. And then I watered it in very gently because there was only about a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more, but mostly about a 1/4 inch on top of those seeds. And I didn't want to disturb that too much. So I very gently just kind of watered everything in. And then here's the key with carrots is if they dry out whatsoever, they're not gonna sprout. So what you can do is you can put either like a board or cardboard or something on top of that soil to help keep the moisture in and just kind of tuck them in until they're ready to start sprouting. So what I did is I cut a piece of cardboard to shape and I put it in there in that little wine barrel, and then I put a couple little bricks on there just so it doesn't blow away. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come back in about 1 week and check on these carrots, and I'm gonna see if they started sprouting. If they have started sprouting, then I'll pull that cardboard off and let them sprout up. But if they haven't started sprouting, I'm going to put the cardboard back on and then check it once a day until they do start sprouting. But I don't want to pull that cardboard off until everything starts coming up because I don't want to let them dry out or let them get disturbed or anything, because carrots, once you get them growing, they're super easy to grow, but getting them to sprout can kind of be difficult. Now later that evening, we still had to get another tower garden set up. We weren't quite done yet. So what we did is we got some soil and started mixing that soil. And this time we just used like a little hand auger with a drill because it works much faster to mix that soil than just doing it by hand. And the kids think it's hilarious and fun and they enjoy it. So that makes me enjoy it too. And then we got the garden out of the box and started filling it with the soil. And this one's a little bit different than the other tower garden. This tower garden has 7 tiers instead of 5 tiers. And the reason for that is with the one that has the 7 tiers, the green one that we're doing, that one you plant things with more shallow root systems. This can be things like strawberries and lettuces and some herbs and different things like that. And you can just create this giant salad and herb garden on one tower. And it gives you 7 tiers, which is a lot more pockets compared to the 5-tier one. The pockets are gonna be much shallower. The roots won't have as far to go. So that's why you have to make sure that you're planting things that don't get as big and they don't have such intense root systems. On the 5-tier one, we're gonna experiment a little bit this year because on the 5-tier one, you can grow much bigger things. We've grown a lot of peppers in this before. You can even grow things like squashes and tomatoes and different things like that. So with this one, I'm gonna let my wife probably what we'll end up doing is just go to the nurseries and see whatever she wants to grow. We'll throw it in there and see how it does. If you put something like a squash in there, it's not gonna grow to a full-size squash, but you will be able to get squash from it. It's still gonna grow a plant, and that plant is gonna produce. It just might not produce as well as if it had enough room to spread its legs. Now, if I'm being totally honest, I don't think my wife knows a single thing that she wants to grow in this garden of hers. I'm still gonna grow her tomatoes in my garden. She gets 4 of my raised beds just for her tomatoes, and honestly, we might end up doing more than that. She does a lot with her tomatoes with cooking and preserving and canning and freeze drying, and tomatoes are something that I want to make sure that she can grow as many as she wants because I love her cooking and I want her to grow those. Anything besides tomatoes that she wants, I'm gonna have her grow out front. Now, honestly, if she runs out of room in her front garden, I will give her whatever room she needs in mine. But with her garden, I honestly think this is gonna be one of those things. This is gonna be a fun garden where as soon as all the nurseries open up and they start having all the cool sales and plants and you walk in there and you just wanna buy everything, instead of having the garden completely planned out like I normally do with the garden here that I'm sitting in, we're just gonna go to the nurseries and be like, hey, do you wanna grow that? What about that? How about we grow some of those? And we're gonna see what she comes up with, and it's gonna be fun. And I'm excited about that because my garden out here is normally pretty planned out and I know what I'm growing months before I actually grow it. So getting back to the original roots of gardening where you get excited just walking into a nursery to see what you're gonna grow, to me that excites me, and I'm really happy to have this garden for her now up front where we can kind of get back to that and just grow whatever it is that we find.